The great chamber of Ostvarn had been built to silence women like her. Marenya Vask understood this with sudden, devastating clarity as she pressed her shoulder against the cold stone of the gallery wall, her breath fogging the carved griffins that flanked the alcove where she had hidden herself. 6 stories below, the floor of the chamber was a mosaic of black marble and pale silver, polished until the assembled lords and ladies seemed to walk on the surface of a frozen lake. 1,000 torches burned in the iron sconces lining the walls. 1,000 more reflected back from the vast mirrors set between them, until the chamber blazed with a light that was almost cruel. She should not have come here. She had told herself this every step of the long climb up the servants' stair to the disused gallery, where no one would think to look. And still she had kept walking, because the alternative was to sit alone in her chamber for 1 more hour, waiting for a message that would never come. He had not sent for her in 11 days. 11 days of silence from the man who, 2 months ago, had told her he could not survive a single sunset without hearing her voice. 11 days of unanswered notes left on the silver tray outside his study. 11 days of catching glimpses of him in the corridors, only to watch him pass her by, his eyes sliding over her face as if she were furniture, as if she were nothing. She had told herself there was an explanation. Vanoran Drakal, the Alpha King of Ostvarn, did not simply forget the woman whose throat he had marked with his teeth in the deep snow of Highmoor Forest. He did not forget the woman to whom he had whispered, with his face buried in her hair, that she was the only true thing in a kingdom built of lies. And yet here she stood, watching the chamber fill with the highest blood of the realm, and she understood at last that something had broken between them, and she had been the last to know. Below, the herald struck his iron staff against the marble 3 times. The sound rang through the chamber like a bell tolling for a funeral. My lords, my ladies, the pact of binding will now commence. Marenya pressed her hand flat against the carved griffin to steady herself. Her other hand had drifted, without her permission, to rest against the smooth fabric stretched across her stomach, where for 9 weeks now she had carried a secret she had not yet found the courage to tell him. That was not entirely true. She had stood outside his study 7 different times. The 7th, 8 days ago, she had finally raised her hand to knock, and through the heavy oak, she had heard the voice of Counselor Iskareth saying, "The Vask girl is becoming a complication, my king. The southern lords have noticed. You will have to be seen to dismiss her." And she had heard Vanoran answer in a voice she did not recognize, "I know." She had walked back to her chamber with her hand pressed to her mouth so that no one in the corridor would hear her weeping. Now, 11 days later, she had her answer. The herald struck his staff again. "Approach, my king." Vanoran Drakal stepped through the great archway, and Marenya felt her heart stop in her chest as if a fist had closed around it. He was wearing the ceremonial black, the high collar embroidered with silver thread, the long coat that fell to his knees, the heavy chain of office across his shoulders. His dark hair had been brushed back from his face, exposing the sharp line of his jaw, the cold beauty that had always made men step aside in corridors without knowing why they did it. Once, 3 months ago, he had come to her chamber in the same coat. He had pulled the silver chain over his head and dropped it onto her dressing table and said, "I hate this thing. It weighs on me like every dead king who wore it before." And then he had laid his head in her lap and let her smooth his hair until he fell asleep. The man walking through the chamber now did not look as if he had ever rested anything in any woman's lap. His face was a mask. Beautiful, remote, untouchable. He nodded to lords as he passed them, but the nods were perfunctory, the eyes distant. He was performing the role of king the way an actor performs a role he has memorized too well, and Marenya, who had spent 100 nights mapping every expression his face could make, knew with absolute certainty that he was not present in his own body. That should have given her hope. But hope was a luxury she had run out of 3 nights ago. The great doors at the far end opened. Sereth of House Corvel was 23 years old, the only daughter of the most powerful southern lord. Her gown was the color of fresh snow at dawn. embroidered with thread that caught the torchlight like spilled mercury. Her hair, the deep red of polished copper, had been braided with white pearls. She walked the length of the chamber with her chin high, and when she reached the foot of the dais, she lowered herself into a curtsy so deep that her gown pooled around her like spilled cream. Marenya watched Vanarin's face. He looked down at the woman kneeling before him, and his expression did not change. It was not coldness. Coldness was an emotion. This was the absence of emotion, the careful blankness of a man who had decided that nothing he did in this chamber tonight would touch the part of him that still felt anything at all. He had locked himself away. And he had not warned her. He had not come to her one last time. He had not even given her the gift of an honest goodbye. The mark on her collarbone began to burn. Within seconds, it was scalding. She bit down on the heel of her hand to keep from crying out. The bond was still there. The bond was screaming. "My king," the herald intoned. "Will you accept this binding?" There was a long silence. Long enough that for one wild, hopeful, devastating second, Marenya thought he might refuse. Then Vanorin Drakhal said, in a voice she did not recognize, "I accept." The chamber erupted in applause. Sarith rose with a small triumphant smile she did not quite manage to hide. Councillor Iskareth, standing at the foot of the dais in his pale gray robes, allowed himself the smallest tilt of his thin mouth. And the mark on Marenya's collarbone burned and burned, as if her own skin were trying to reject the bond 1,000 miles before her mind had caught up. She stumbled backward into the alcove. Her shoulder struck the stone. She felt nothing except the great hollow ringing emptiness where her future had been 5 minutes ago, and the small fierce kick of the child who chose that exact moment to remind her she was not alone in her body. Her hand flew to her stomach. "I know," she whispered to the child she had not yet named. "I know, I am here." She turned and fled. The servant's stair was empty, every soul in the castle either in the chamber or watching from a corridor window. No one saw the dark-haired girl in the brown shawl moving down the spiral steps with both hands pressed to her body. No one saw her cross the lower courtyard. No one saw her slip through the kitchen gardens, past the herb beds where she had once stood with him in the rain and laughed. In her chamber, she did not weep. She had wept enough in the last 11 days to last her a lifetime. She moved with the strange, clear efficiency of grief that has decided to become motion. The traveling cloak from the cedar chest. The leather satchel her mother had given her on her 13th name day. 2 simple dresses, a pair of stockings, her brush, and the small bone pendant her grandmother had pressed into her palm before she died. The one carved with the old protection runes that no one in Ostvarn remembered how to read. She lifted it from the hook by the window. She closed her hand around it. She tied the leather cord beneath her hair and let the carved bone settle warm against her skin where the mark burned. She paused at the writing desk. There was a letter she had been working on for 3 nights now, and she had still not been able to finish it. She picked it up. She read the last unfinished sentence, the one she had stopped at because the truth of it had been too much. "I am carrying your child, and you do not even know that I exist anymore." She walked to the small hearth. She knelt before it. She fed the letter into the dying fire one piece at a time and watched the flames take each word, and in the end, one corner of the last page curled, charred but unburnt, and rolled clear of the embers onto the warm stone of the hearth, where she did not see it. Then she rose. She lifted her satchel. "Goodbye," she said softly to the empty room. "I forgive you. I do not know if I will ever stop forgiving you. But I will not stay to be forgotten." She drew her hood up. She slipped out into the corridor. She walked the back stairs to the postern gate, where the night guard, who when he saw her face asked no questions at all, simply unlocked the gate, held it open, and bowed his head to her as if she were a queen. She walked into the dark. She did not look back. She did not see, 6 stories above the chamber, the candle that suddenly flickered in the high tower window. She did not see the shadow that crossed the glass. She did not see the figure that stumbled to the casement and threw it open and stood there, half bent, one hand braced against the stone, as if his own chest had betrayed him. She did not hear the sound he made. It was not quite a word. It was not quite a howl. It was the sound of a man waking up too late to stop the thing he had done, and it carried out across the snow-dark courtyards of Ostvarn and into the forest beyond, where the wolves of the king's own pack lifted their heads from sleep and answered him with a chorus of grief that no one in the chamber heard, because the chamber was still ringing with applause. By the time the king reached her chamber, 10 minutes later, with his ceremonial coat half unfastened, and Counselor Iskareth and 3 guards trying to stop him in the corridor, Marenya was already a mile beyond the gates. The fire on her hearth had burned down to embers, and there on the warm stone, the only thing left in the room that had been hers, lay one small charred corner of a letter, with a single line of her hand still legible across it. He sank to his knees on the floor of the empty chamber. He read it. And the howl that came out of him then was not a man's sound at all. The fishing village of Bray Eithlin sat at the place where the great northern fjord narrowed into a black ribbon of water before opening again into the open sea. 5 months after the night she had walked out of Ostvarn, Marenya Vask had become the woman who lived in the cottage at the end of the cliff path, who came down to the harbor twice a week to trade healing teas for fish and bread, and who never spoke of where she had come from. The villagers called her Wren. It was the name she had given them on the night she had stumbled out of the snow with her hood pulled low and her hand pressed to her stomach, half frozen and entirely silent, and the old fisherwoman Tova Halberin had taken her in without asking the questions a less wise woman would have asked. Tova had given her broth. Tova had given her a bed. Tova had let her cry through the entire first night without saying a word, and then in the morning had simply said, "There is a cottage at the end of the cliff path that has been empty for 6 years, and the village could use a healer who knows her herbs." That had been 5 months ago. The cottage had a thatched roof that needed mending, and a single window that looked out across the black water of the fjord. There was a small herb garden that someone had once loved and then abandoned, which Marenya had spent the autumn coaxing back into life. She was 24 years old. She had lost almost everything she had ever loved, and she had survived. She was now in her 7th month, and her body had become something she did not entirely recognize, a slow, heavy fullness she carried with the same stubborn patience she carried everything else. Sometimes, when she lay in bed at night with her hand pressed to her stomach, she could swear she felt the kicks coming from 2 different places. She had asked Tova about it once, casually, and Tova had looked at her for a long moment with eyes the color of wet slate and said only, "Some carry one, some carry more. The body knows." Marenya had not asked again. She did her work. She delivered babies. She set broken bones. She walked the cliff path morning and evening, the wind tearing at her cloak, the salt smell rising from the rocks below. She slept badly, and every single night without fail, she dreamed of him. The dreams were worse than the days. In the dreams, he was not the cold man on the dais. In the dreams, he was the Vanoran she had first loved. The one who used to come to her in the herb garden after council meetings with his eyes hollow from too many lies. The one who used to bury his face in her shoulder and breathe her in like she was the only clean thing in his life. In the dreams, he wept. She would wake with her face wet, and the mark on her collarbone burning so hot she could not lie down again. She would sit by the window with her hand pressed against the bone pendant her grandmother had given her, and she would understand that whatever bond she had believed was broken in the chamber of Ostvarn had not in fact been broken at all. She did not let herself think about what that might mean. If she thought about it, she would have to consider going back. And she could not go back. It was the 11th day of the 3rd month of spring when the news came. She was in the harbor market when she heard the children shouting. There was a ship in the bay. A trading ship from the south. The first of the season. Half the village abandoned what they were doing and ran for the harbor wall, and Marenya, after a moment's hesitation, followed them. The captain was a thick-bearded man named Halvar, who had a voice like a sea storm. He stood on the harbor wall and told them the news of the kingdom. The harvest had been thin. There had been a fire in the great library at Carthen, and then, almost as an afterthought, his voice dropping into the low conspiratorial tone of a man passing along a tale he was not entirely sure he believed, he said, "And of course, there is the king." Marenya, standing at the back of the small crowd, went very still. "What of him?" said one of the village men. Halvar shook his head slowly. "Worse, every month. The whole court is on edge. The binding bride sits in her wing of the palace and weeps, because he will not see her. They say he has not slept properly in 5 months. They say his wolf is taking him over. He has torn apart half the eastern provinces searching for someone. A girl vanished from the palace the same night as the binding ceremony, and the king has been hunting her ever since. He will not say her name, even to his own counselors, but he has offered 50,000 gold to any man who brings him word of where she is." The basket slipped from Marenya's hip. She caught it just before it fell. She forced a smile and stepped back from the crowd as quickly as she could. 50,000 gold. He had been searching for her. Through 3 winter passes and across half a kingdom. He had not slept. He had been losing himself to his wolf. He had offered a fortune for her name and refused to speak it himself. And now, walking back toward the cliff path, Marenya finally allowed herself to think the thing she had not allowed herself to think for 5 months. What if she had been wrong? What if the cold mask on the dais had not been the truth? What if something had happened in the 11 days of silence? Something she did not know about, that had made him do what he had done. The child kicked. Sharply. Twice on opposite sides of her belly. Marenya pressed both hands to her stomach and bent forward over them. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not know what to do." She walked back to the cottage slowly. She did not light the fire. She sat at her small table and watched the gray afternoon fade slowly into evening. She had decided she would stay where she was when she was reaching for the kindling and the dog began to bark. It was the hoarse, sharp, frightened bark of an old animal that had not barked at anything in a long time. The dog belonged to her nearest neighbor, half a mile down the cliff. The bark came again. And then, beneath it, a different sound. A long, low, rolling howl. A wolf in the cliffs above Bray Eithlin, where there had not been a wolf in living memory. Marenya's mark went so hot she gasped. The howl came again. Closer. It was not just a wolf. It was his wolf. She knew it the way her body knew which way was up. She knew it because the bond inside her chest was singing so loud that she could hardly hear her own heartbeat. He was here. Somehow, after 5 months of searching, he was here. There was a soft knock on the door. It was not the knock of a wolf. It was the knock of a man. A man's voice, low and unfamiliar, said through the heavy wood, "Mistress, forgive me. My name is Kalorn Veshten. I am the first captain of the Drakal Guard. I mean you no harm, and I am not alone. May I please come in?" Marenya stood in the middle of her cottage with one hand on her belly and the other on the iron poker by the hearth, and she understood that her quiet life had just ended. She walked to the door. She opened it. The man on her threshold was not what she had expected. He was tall, but his hair was the soft pale gray of beach stones, and his eyes were a quiet hazel, and his face was older than she had thought it would be. He wore a heavy traveling cloak over plain dark wool, no insignia. His hands, when he raised them slowly to show her they were empty, were the scarred hands of a man who had spent his life in service to violence and survived it. "Mistress Wren," he said. "Or, if you will permit me, Lady Marenya." The use of her real name should have terrified her. It did not. Something in his face told her this was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally arrived at the place where he could put it down. "You should not be here," she said. "No. I came alone, in plain dress, by a route none of my men know. My king does not yet know I have found you. He does not know I have been searching for you on a different track than he is. I have been ahead of him by perhaps a week for the last month, and the only reason I am still ahead of him is because his wolf is, at present, not entirely under his control. The mark on her collarbone burned so hot it made her eyes water. Why? She whispered. Because you are owed the truth before you see him again. Because what was done to him 5 months ago was also done to you, and you were not told. Because if my king finds you before you understand what happened in the chamber that night, you will look at his face and see only what you saw in the gallery, and it will destroy something in him that I am not certain I can put back together a second time. The world tilted very slowly around her. May I come in? Please. She stepped aside. He moved into her small cottage with the careful courtesy of a man entering a temple. He waited until she had lowered herself into the chair by the hearth, before he lowered himself slowly to one knee. Lady Marenya. Just Marenya, please. As you wish. 11 days before the binding ceremony, my king began to behave in ways that were not consistent with the man any of us had served. He grew distant. He stopped sending for the people he was closest to. He spoke only to Councillor Iskareth, and to Lord Corvel, and to the southern delegation. We assumed he was buckling under the weight of the binding decision. We were wrong. She closed her eyes. On the night of the binding, the king walked into that chamber and accepted Sereth of House Corvel in the formal pact, and walked out. And within the hour he came tearing down through the lower corridors calling your name. I stopped him myself. He was not in his right mind. By the time we had calmed him enough to speak, he was on the floor of your chamber with the embers of your fire still warm in the hearth and the burnt corner of your letter in his hand. And he did not know how he had got there. She opened her eyes. The room had gone blurry. He did not remember the binding. He remembered 11 days of fog, of feeling as if he were watching himself from the bottom of a deep well. He remembered Councillor Iskareth bringing him cups of a dark spiced wine every evening, and he remembered the wine tasting strange the last few days, and he remembered nothing else. Drugged, she whispered. We believe so. We have not been able to prove it. The kitchen master who served the wine vanished from the palace 2 nights after the binding and has not been found. We have suspicions. Lord Corvel wanted his daughter on the throne for 15 years. Councillor Iskareth has loathed your existence at court since the first night the king brought you out of the kitchens. She was shaking. She pressed her hands flat against the curve of her belly and felt the child kick once, twice, sharp against her palms. Why you are telling me now, she said. Because for the first 6 weeks after the binding, we did not know if you were alive. The king tore the eastern provinces apart looking for you. By the time we understood that you had simply walked, alone, into the snow, my king had become someone the court could no longer fully manage. And then, 3 weeks ago, the Corvels made a move that changed everything. He drew out a folded letter, sealed in deep red wax that had been broken. He laid it on the small table. This was intercepted from a Corvel courier 11 days ago, at the eastern border crossing. She unfolded the heavy paper. The handwriting was small, neat, and careful. The message was 3 lines. The girl has been located in the western coastal villages. The work must be completed before the king reaches her. The Southern Accord cannot survive a living rival. She read it 3 times. They sent killers, she said. Her voice had gone quiet and level and far away. After me. After the child. Yes. How many? At least one party left the southern provinces 6 days ago by fast horse. They will be perhaps 2 days from here. And your king. 3 days behind me, at the closest. The bond pulls him in long arcs, and he loses days when his wolf takes him. I am only here ahead of him because I have been following the maps and the rumors, not the bond. The question, mistress, is whether he or the Corvel killers reach this cottage first. Marenya looked at her own hands resting on the curve of her belly. What do? We wait. We watch. I have 2 of my own men camped a half-mile down the coast. We hope, mistress, that the king's wolf has remembered enough of who he is to fight on the right side. She let out a small, exhausted breath that was almost a laugh. That is a great deal of hoping, Captain Veshten. I have been doing it for 5 months. I have gotten quite good at it. She looked at this strange older man who had ridden across half a kingdom alone, ahead of his own king, to give her the truth before anyone else could find her, and something inside her shifted. Sit. I will make us tea. She rose. She set the kettle over the fire. Her hands were perfectly steady. She did not understand why. The kettle began to sing. And outside, somewhere in the cliffs above Bray Eithlin, a wolf that did not belong on these cliffs lifted its head and howled once more, long and low and full of grief, and Marenya, pouring water into the small clay pot, felt her mark pulse in answer. Somewhere on the southern road, 3 pairs of riders in unmarked gray cloaks pushed their horses harder into the gathering dark and did not stop for the night. The killers came on the 3rd night. Marenya had not slept properly since Caelorn had walked into her cottage. The bond inside her chest had become a living thing that paced the cage of her ribs all night long. The mark on her collarbone had been hot for so many hours that she had stopped noticing it. He was close. She did not need anyone to tell her. She had spent the 3rd afternoon doing the small, useful tasks of a woman preparing to leave a place she had loved. Tova had come up from the village with a basket of bread and dried fish, and Marenya had not been able to tell her what was coming. Tova had pressed her dry hand to Marenya's cheek and said, "You come back when you can, child. The cottage will be here." Then she had walked back down the cliff path without looking back. The night fell early. Caelorn had built the fire small and tight, the way men who expected to be hunted built fires. His 2 men, Ranveth and Corben, were positioned outside in the dark. She was sitting by the small fire with a cup of strong black tea when the first sound came. It was the sound of a bird, a sharp 2-note whistle that no bird in this part of the coast had ever made. Caelorn was on his feet before the 2nd note had finished, his long knife already in his hand. "That is Ranveth. They are here. Mistress, the cellar. Now, whatever you hear, do not come up until I or one of the men or my king himself opens that door." She did not argue. She moved as quickly as her 7-month belly would allow her to the iron ring set into the floor by the hearth. She lifted it. She lowered herself awkwardly down the short ladder. Caelorn handed her down the small iron lamp and the long knife from his belt, and a small leather purse heavy with silver. "Mistress Marenya, if we fall, the boat is in the harbor. Do not wait for anyone. Go." She nodded. He closed the trapdoor. The cellar was small, with a small grate set into the wall at her knee height, which let in a thin trickle of cold night air and a thin trickle of sound. She lowered herself to the earth floor beside it. She listened. For a long time there was only the wind and the slow heave of the sea. Then there was a sound. A wet sound. The sound of a body being lowered to the ground by hands that did not want it to make noise. A killer. Then more than one. There was a soft scratch at the cottage door. A pause. The grind of metal on wood as something was slid into the crack of the doorframe. Then everything happened at once. Caelorn's voice, low and clear and absolutely without fear, said, "I would rather not, friend. But I will." A strange voice answered, light and almost amused. "Open the door, Captain. We have no quarrel with you. Step aside. We are here for the woman. You have a quarrel with me now." The door exploded inward. Marenya heard the heavy ring of steel on steel, the close, violent breath of men fighting at arm's length. A body hit the floor. Another. She heard Caelorn snarl something that was not a word, and the sound of more men pouring through the broken door. There were 4 of them. She heard him take one of them down. A second. The third struck him. The 4th man laughed. "Captain Veshten. Old wolf, you should have stayed in your kennel. I serve my king. A dying virtue. Where is she?" A silence that ended in the sound of a man being struck. Marenya closed her eyes. She thought, I cannot let him die for me. She had spent 5 months learning to be a woman who walked away. She had not known until this moment that she had also been learning, all that time, to be a woman who could walk back. She rose. She closed her eyes. She pressed both her hands flat against her own collarbone, against the mark. She had told herself for years that she had only the small healing gifts, the teas, the poultices, the steady hand with a needle. The old healer Baron, who had trained her in the low villages, had warned her that there were no good places in the world for a girl with deeper magic in her hands, that the safest thing she could do with what she carried was pretend she did not carry it at all. She had pretended for 24 years. She stopped pretending. She let the warmth in her palms come up, and this time, instead of pressing it away, she let it come. It came up through her wrists, into her chest, met the burning of the mark and the burning of the bond, and the three heats braided together into something that was no longer warmth at all, but a pure, white, live thing that wanted out. She opened her eyes. Her hands were glowing. Not the soft, warm gold she had sometimes seen at the edges of her palms. This was a clean, white-silver light, the color of moonlight on the fjord. She walked to the trapdoor. She placed her palms flat against the underside of the wood. She did not push. She let the light go where it wanted to go, and the wood under her hands warmed, and the iron ring above gave a small, soft sound of strain. The trapdoor lifted. She climbed the ladder. The cottage above her was a ruin. 2 of the killers were down already. Caelorn was on his knees in the middle of the floor, his pale gray hair dark with his own blood. One hand pressed against his side where a blade had gone in deep. The 3rd killer was standing over him with a short, curved sword raised. The 4th, the one with the light, amused voice, was a thin, pale-haired man with eyes the color of a winter sky, and he was the one who turned first. He turned because the cottage had filled, suddenly, with the soft white silver light of her hands. For one long moment he simply stared at the pregnant woman rising out of her own floor with light pouring from her palms, and Marenya saw the cold, professional recalculation of a man who had been told he was coming to kill a frightened girl and had just discovered he was wrong about the girl. He raised his crossbow. She raised her right hand. The thing inside her chest that had been pacing for 5 months was running. It went through her shoulder and down her arm and out through her palm in a single white pulse, and the air between her hand and the pale-haired man flexed, and the crossbow bolt that he had just released stopped in midair as if it had struck a wall of glass, and dropped to the floor. The 3rd killer took 1 step toward her. She raised her left hand. The white light poured out across the small cottage like water from a broken dam, and it touched the 3rd killer. And he made a sound that was not entirely human, and he flew backward across the room and struck the stone wall above the hearth and slid down it and did not move again. The pale-haired man took 1 step backward. "Witch," he said. His voice was small and very tight. "You are a witch." She walked toward him. The child kicked once, twice, 3 times, sharp and steady. And Marenya understood with sudden clarity that the child was helping, that whatever was in her hands was not entirely hers alone. He turned. He ran for the door. He did not reach it. The forest at the cliff edge above the cottage made a sound like a great old tree splitting. A black shape, enormous, came over the top of the cliff path in a single long bound and was at the broken door in 3 more. And it took the pale-haired man across the threshold of the cottage in its jaws, as if he weighed no more than a sack of grain. There was a sound. It did not last long. The black shape dropped the body of the pale-haired man at the edge of the herb garden and turned its head, and its eyes, the color of a forge fire seen through smoke, found her. It did not move. It stood in the doorway of her ruined cottage, this creature that was bigger than any wolf had any right to be. The white silver light still poured from her hands. The bond inside her chest was not a wolf in a cage anymore. The bond was simply a road, and at the other end of the road was the thing standing in her doorway, and they were finally, after 5 months and 11 days, looking at each other. The black wolf made a sound. Not a growl. It was the soft, ragged, broken sound of a creature that had just put down a weight it had been carrying for so long it had forgotten what it was like not to carry it. It took one step into the cottage, then another. Its great head lowered. It came to a stop with its huge, soft black muzzle 3 inches from her belly. It did not touch her. It waited. She lowered her hands. The light went out of them slowly, the way a candle goes out. She raised one hand. She placed it very gently on the broad black skull of the wolf in her doorway. His eyes closed. He shifted. The black coat thinned and was gone. The long body folded inward. And in the space of a single shared breath, Vanorin Drakal, the Alpha King of Ostvarn, was kneeling on the broken floor of her cottage, his head bowed, his bare shoulders shaking, his face buried against the curve of her belly. And he was weeping the way she had only ever heard a man weep once before in her life. She stood very still. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during her months of exile. She had imagined rage. She had imagined cold indifference. She had not imagined him on his knees before her. Behind her, on the floor by the hearth, Kalorn coughed wetly. She turned her head. She left the king on his knees. She crossed to the captain. She knelt beside him. She placed her hands on his side and let the warm thing in her palms come up again. Gold this time. Soft this time. The healing she had pretended for 24 years she did not have. He gasped. Vanorin turned his head and watched her work. With the same naked, unguarded look he had worn the first night he had ever told her he loved her. She closed Kalorn's wound. She did not heal him completely, but she closed the bleeding. She rose. She turned. She looked at the man kneeling in the middle of her broken floor. Get up. He got up. His hands hung at his sides as if he did not know what to do with them. You took your time, she said. His mouth shook. He pressed the back of his hand against it, hard, and looked away, and looked back, and finally, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, said, I am here now. Yes, you are. And then her knees finally gave out beneath her, and she let herself, for the first time in 5 months, fall. He caught her before she reached the floor. She did not faint. She let her knees give. She let his arms take her. She let him lower her, very carefully, onto the small bench by the hearth that had somehow survived the destruction of the cottage. She let him kneel in front of her and press his forehead against her knees and stay there, breathing, for a long time. A shape appeared in the broken doorway. Corbin, the older of Kalorn's 2 men. His left arm hung at a strange angle and there was a dark, wet line across his forehead, but he was alive. Mistress. He inclined his head. He looked at Vanorin. My king. Ranveth? Down the path. They came on him from above. He took 2 with him before they brought him down. The king closed his eyes. The small muscle in his jaw worked once, twice. He had a wife. In the south. He did, my king. I will see to her myself. There will be more, my king. Not tonight. But there will be more. We need to move. I know. Where are we going? Vanorin looked up at her. His face, lit from below by the small firelight, was the face of a man who had been hollowed out by 5 months and had not yet been refilled. I do not know yet. She has not told me where she wants to go. She thought, that is the first thing he has said tonight that has felt like the man I knew. I want to go somewhere I can sit down for an hour with you, she said quietly, and speak to you. Corbin, is there a place near here that is not this cottage and is not the village? My lady, there is the old fisherman's hut on the headland east of here. 1/2 mile. Then we go there. The fisherman's hut was a single small stone room with a turf roof. Corbin built a fire while Vanorin helped Kalorn into a corner and laid him down on a folded cloak. The captain caught the king's wrist with surprising strength. My king, you will not be a fool tonight. Vanorin made a small sound that was almost a laugh. I will try. Try harder than that, please. Vanorin nodded once. He rose. He looked across the small hut at her, where she stood near the fire. He did not approach. He waited. Corbin. Captain Veshten. Will you give us the corner of this hut for an hour? Mistress. Corbin walked, without a word, to the far side of the small fire. He turned his back. He sat. Caelorn closed his eyes, and within a minute his breathing had gone slow and steady. Vanarin took one step toward her. He stopped. May I touch you? He asked. The question hit her harder than she had expected. It hit her because it was the question of a man who had not assumed. The Vanarin she remembered, 2 months before the ceremony, had not asked. He had touched her face and her hair, and the small of her back, as if her body were as much his as his own, and she had loved him for it. And she had also, in some private place, she had not quite admitted to herself, been beginning to ache from it. There had been a slow shift in him in the months before the binding. He had stopped asking for things. He had begun to assume them. And the loss of his asking had been a small gray wound she had not known how to speak of. And now, in a stone hut on a headland 500 miles from the palace where he had once forgotten to ask, the first thing the Alpha King of Ostvarn said to her was, "May I?" She felt her eyes fill. She nodded, once. He crossed the small space between them. He did not pull her against him. He stopped 1 pace away. He raised one hand, very slowly, and laid it, palm flat, against the curve of her belly. The child kicked, hard, twice against his hand. He made a small, wrecked sound. "Sit, Vanarin. Please, I cannot stand and have this conversation." He sat on the rough plank floor, his back against the wall by the fire. She sat down beside him. She did not touch him. She had earned this hour. "You took the binding pact," she said, "in front of every house in the kingdom. You took her hand. You said, 'I accept.'" "I do not remember saying it. Caelorn told me. He told you the truth." "Marenya, I do not remember any of it. I remember walking into the chamber. I remember the candles. After that, I remember waking up in your chamber with the burnt corner of your letter in my hand and not knowing how I got there. I remember screaming your name into an empty room. Wine. Yes. Iskareth has been bringing me a spiced wine to help me sleep for over a year. I never tasted anything wrong with it until the last week before the binding, and then I told myself I was imagining it, because the alternative was that the man who had been my father's first counselor and now mine had been poisoning me. "And me," she said. "What do you have of me?" He looked at her. His eyes, the same dark amber she remembered, held hers. "I have nothing of you, Marenya. I have not had anything of you for 5 months. And before that, for some time before that, I had been losing you in a way that I did not see, and you, I think, did not know how to tell me. And that is the part that I cannot blame on Iskareth, and cannot blame on the wine, and cannot blame on anything but myself." She did not answer. "In the gallery, on the night of the ceremony, you were there?" "Yes." "And the 11 days, the 7th night, you raised your hand to knock. And you heard Iskareth say something, and you heard me answer, and you walked away. He said I was becoming a complication. He said you would have to be seen to dismiss me. And you said, 'I know. I do not remember saying it. But you heard me.' And whether the man in the chair was me, or was the man Iskareth had been growing in my skin for a year on a cup of wine every night, the thing that cracked in you when you heard it was not made by Iskareth. It was made by the 11 days before that, when I stopped sending for you, when I walked past you in the corridors as if I could not see you. The wine did all of that, Marenya, but the wine and Iskareth could not have done all of that if there had not been somewhere in me, by then, that was tired enough of you to let them." He sat with his back against the cold stone wall, and after a long time he said, in a voice she had to lean closer to hear, "You are right. I am not going to pretend the wine made me a man who did not have to ask. I had stopped asking before the wine. I had begun to assume you. I had begun to use you the way a man uses a hearth, as a thing you come back to in the cold and warm yourself against, and do not think about when the room is warm. I had begun to think that because the bond was there, and because you had said yes to me in the high meadow 2 years ago, that you would always be there, no matter how I treated the days. I do not know when I started believing that. I only know that by the time Iskareth's wine began to do its work, the work was easier than it should have been, because the man it was working on had already been making himself smaller toward you for months, and I had not even noticed I was doing it. A small sound came out of her that she could not stop. "I took you for granted," he said. The words came out flat and clear and absolutely without excuse. I, who had been given the rarest gift any wolf in 3 generations had been given. I took you for granted. I let myself stop seeing you, and the fact that another man poured poison into my cup does not undo the fact that he found a hand willing to lift the cup. The hand was mine. She wept. The thing she had needed to hear, the thing she had not even known she had needed, was not, "I was drugged." It was the rest of it. And he had given it to her, in the first hour of being alone with her again, and he had not made her ask. He turned his head. He saw her crying. He did not move toward her. He simply opened his hand, palm up, on the floor between them, and waited. She put her hand in his. He did not close his fingers around hers, even then. He let her hand rest in his palm. He let her be the one who chose. After a long moment when she still had not pulled away, he lowered his head, slowly, and pressed his mouth against her knuckles. "I love you," she said. The words came out small and rough. "I have loved you the entire time, even in the gallery, even the night I burned the letter. I love you, and I have not stopped, and I do not know how to." He pressed his forehead against the back of her hand. "I love you. I have always loved you. I will spend the rest of my life learning how to deserve having said it." The fire popped softly. They sat like that for a long time. And then, somewhere in the dead hours before dawn, Corbin rose silently from his place by the hearth and went to the door, and after a moment he said, "My king, a rider on the headland path, coming fast, from the south." Vanarin was on his feet in a single fluid motion. Marenya followed. The rider was a young man, perhaps 20, riding a gray horse that was foaming at the bit. He dropped to one knee in the wet grass. The badge on his cloak was the silver wolf of the king's own household guard. "My king, forgive me. I have ridden 3 horses to death getting here. Speak. Counselor Iskareth has moved on the palace. 2 nights ago. He has the southern guard. He has Lord Corvel. He has placed Lady Sareth on the high seat. He is calling it a regency. He has set a trial of the loyal household for the morning of the next full moon. He says any man or woman of your house who has not sworn to him by then will hang. The full moon is in 7 days." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanarin turned. He looked down at her. His eyes had gone the gold she remembered from the night 2 years ago in the high meadow. Marenya. She knew what he was going to ask. She did not let him. "I am coming with you. You are 7 months. I am coming with you, Vanarin. There are people in that palace who have served us both. There is a kitchen full of women I have known by name for 2 years, and Iskareth will hang every one of them. We are going. Together. I have spent 5 months running from that palace, and I am done running, and I am coming home." He bowed his head. "Yes, my heart, we go together." They were on the road within the hour. Corbin rode point. Caelorn, still gray and slow but able to sit a horse, rode rear. The young rider, whose name was Thomas Vell, rode the spare. And Vanarin rode in the center with Marenya in the saddle in front of him, his cloak wrapped around them both, his arm secured around her waist below the curve of her belly. He did not speak for the first hour. Neither did she. There was nothing wrong with the silence. It was a different silence than the 11 days. The 11 days had been a silence built of absence. This was a silence built of presence, of 2 people who had each said the worst of what they had to say, and were now simply sitting inside the relief of having said it. The mark on her collarbone no longer burned. It pulsed gently in time with her own heartbeat. When he finally spoke, it was so soft she almost did not hear him. "I went mad," he said. She turned her head a little against his shoulder. "After waking in your chamber. There were 6 weeks where I do not have a clean memory of myself. I tore through the eastern provinces. I was not always in human shape when I slept. There was a town in the foothills called Skell, where I am told I broke the gates because the steward had locked them against me at night, and I do not remember doing it. There were nights when I was not sure I would come back to my own shape in the morning. The wolf wanted to stay. Kalorn would talk me back at dawn. He would put a hand on my throat where I lay in the dirt, and he would talk and talk, in his slow, steady voice, about ordinary things, and after enough time the wolf would go back into the place it lives, and I would come back into my own body. Kalorn saved you. Kalorn saved me. He is going to hate that I know that. He is going to hate that I know that too." His arm tightened around her. It came back. The shape of myself. About 2 months in, because the bond changed. Changed how? It steadied. It stopped flaring and settled into the slow heat. Because by then your body had decided I was not coming, and yours had decided to stop trying to call me. And I lost something the day that happened, Marenya. I lost the loud sense of you. And in the quiet, I started to be a man again. She thought about the slow change she had felt in herself in those same weeks, the night she had stopped expecting to wake up and find him at the door. The afternoon she had finally cleared the herb garden and known that she was making a life that did not include him in it. She had thought at the time that she was healing. She thought now that she had been giving up. She thought, "And the moment I gave up, you came back to yourself." "There is something I have not told you," she said quietly. His arm did not tighten. He had learned in the hut to wait. "I have felt for 2 months now that there are 2. A very long pause. 2. 2 heartbeats. The midwife said it could be 1, or it could be 2. I have known, since I felt the kicks come from 2 different sides, that it is 2. He was very still behind her. 2 of our children. Yes." She felt him bow his head until his forehead pressed against her hair. She felt his free hand slide down her side and come to rest on the curve of her belly, and she felt the small, fierce kick of one of them against his palm. He made a sound. It was not a word. He pressed his mouth into her hair. 2, he whispered. He did not say anything else for a long time. She let him have the silence because she understood that he had not had a single moment in 5 months to feel the kind of joy that did not also feel, somehow, like grief. Toward mid-afternoon, she felt him stiffen behind her. "What?" "Riders. 6 of them. Corben." "I see them, my king." 6. They wear no badges I can see. The riders came up the coast road, 6 men on dark horses, and they did not slow. As they drew closer, Marenya saw the long, curved sabers at their belts and the dark gray of their cloaks, the same dark gray the pale-haired man had worn. Corvel men, or men paid by Corvel. "Marenya, the light. Can you do it again?" She closed her eyes. The small white pulse she could call up now was the size of a candle flame. Not a sun. Not enough. Not for 6. "Then we do it the other way. Corben, take the lady. Off the road. Up into the rocks." "My king." "That is an order, Captain. Take her into the rocks." Fanarin swung down from the horse. He helped her down. He passed her to Corben. "Thomas, stay on my left." The 2 of them walked their horses out into the middle of the coast road as Corben helped Marenya up the rocky slope. "Corben. He will not lose. My lady, my king has been a fighting wolf since he could walk. The 6 of them will not even be a story he tells later. Look away if you wish." She did not look away. Fanarin shifted on the road. The change went through him in the time it takes a candle to be blown out. The wolf was already moving. He met the 6 riders in the middle of the road, and what happened next did not take very long. When it was over, 2 of the 6 were running south on foot, and 4 of them were not running at all. Vanorin met her halfway down off the rocks. He had pulled his cloak back on, but it was open at the throat, and there was blood at his mouth that was not his. She did not make him ask aloud this time. She walked into his arms. She put her hand against the side of his face and pressed her thumb against the corner of his mouth and wiped the blood away. 2 more days to the palace. 2 more days. And then I take back my house, and you walk into it as the woman you are. And I walk in alone. Vanorin. He went very still. What? Through the gates? The first time. I walk in alone, with Iskareth's hostages on the trial steps, and the southern guard at the doors, and Cyrith on the high seat. Because if you ride in with me at your shoulder, every lord in that hall will see a king reclaiming his property, and that is the story they have been waiting to tell. If I walk in alone, and you come for me after, every lord in that hall will see a queen who walked into a trap by her own choice to save the people in it, and that is a story they will not be able to forget. He did not answer for a long time. He pressed his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes. You walk in alone, and I will come for you. 2 days south, in the high city of Ostvarn, Counselor Iskareth was sitting at the king's table with the king's binding bride at his right hand, planning the trial of the loyal household for the morning of the next full moon. And the queen of Ostvarn rode south to meet him. The high city of Ostvarn was burning in 3 places when she came in sight of it. Not burning the way a city burns when an enemy has reached the gates. Burning the way a city burns when its own people have begun to set their own buildings alight. Iskareth had been holding the gates for 9 days. He had set the trial of the loyal household for the next morning. He had put 43 names on the list of the accused. The first name on the list, after the 4 senior officers, was Tova Halberin. Marenya had asked Kaelorn to repeat it. He had repeated it. Tova was no longer in Bray Eithlin. Tova had been in the palace the whole time. Tova, the old fisherwoman who had taken a half-frozen pregnant girl into her cottage on a winter night 5 months ago and asked no questions, was in fact the king's own milk nurse, the woman who had raised him from his 2nd year after his mother had died, and who had been pensioned off into a fishing village 20 years before because the queen who had replaced his mother had not wanted her at court. Kaelorn had sent her there. Kaelorn had told her to keep her eyes open along the western coast for any pregnant girl who fit a particular description. Tova had found her on the 3rd night. She had said nothing to anyone, including Kaelorn, until 2 months later when she had been certain. Then she had sent a single line in a fish merchant's letter that brought Kaelorn west. Tova had been arrested 4 days ago. Iskareth had put her on the list because she was old, and because she was alone, and because he believed, quite correctly, that the king would lose his head if he heard her name on a hangman's list. For Tova, Marenya would walk into anything. They came at the city through the lower postern, the small, unguarded servants' gate set into the wall behind the household kitchens. Tomas Vel stayed in the oaks with the horses. The rest of them moved on foot. In a small storeroom off the lower kitchen, Kaelorn stopped. My lady, we part here. Corbin and I go up through the household stairs to the loyal officers in the south barracks. The king goes alone up the king's stair to the gallery above the chamber, where he will wait until your moment. You go in alone, through the front doors. I know. He bowed, the full, deep bow of an officer of the king's household to his queen. My queen. I will see you on the other side of this. He went. Corbin went with him. She and Vanorin were alone. For the first time in 5 months he looked, again, like the king of Ostvarn. Sharp-eyed, awake, present in his own body, every part of him gathered in toward a single purpose, and the single purpose was her. Marenya. If anything happens in those 4 minutes... Nothing is going to happen, Vanorin. I am going to walk through those doors, and I am going to make Iskareth look at me. I am going to be exactly where I should always have been, and you are going to come down out of the gallery and stand beside me where you should always have been, and the rest of it is going to take care of itself. He pressed his forehead against hers. I love you. I love you. Now go. He went. She stood in the storeroom for a long moment by herself. She drew a slow breath. She reached up under her dress and drew out the bone pendant on its leather cord and laid it outside the wool, where anyone looking at her would see it. She passed her hand once, lightly, over the curve of her belly, and felt the small, steady kick of one of her two children against her palm. "We are home, my loves," she said quietly. "Walk in with me." She walked out of the storeroom and through the long servants' passage to the chamber doors. Two Southern guards saw a heavily pregnant woman in a traveling cloak with a bone pendant at her throat and crossed their pikes in front of her. "State your business," the older one said. "I have come to stand at the trial of the loyal household. The chamber is closed. Open the doors." He laughed. "Mother, go home and—" He looked at her face. Whatever he saw made him take a small, involuntary step backward. "Open the doors. I will not ask you again." The older guard did the wisest thing he was going to do in his life. He stepped sideways. He opened the door. She walked through. The great chamber of Ostvarn had been built to silence women like her. This time she did not whisper it. She let the thought stand open in her mind as she walked the length of the marble floor, the bone pendant at her throat, the curve of her belly carrying her two children before her, like the prow of a small, slow ship. The chamber was full. 43 accused stood in a long line down the center of the floor, their wrists bound and their faces drawn from days without sleep. Iskareth, in the pale gray robes of his counselor's office, sitting in the chair to the right of the throne. Lord Corvel, in his deep green and silver, sitting in the chair to the left. And on the high seat itself sat Cyrith of House Corvel, thinner than she had been on the night of the binding, her gown the color of dried blood. Marenia looked at her, and she felt, against all expectation, a small painful flicker of something that was almost pity. She did not let it stop her. She walked. She saw Tova at the front of the line. The old woman's hands were bound. Her gray hair had come loose from its braid. Her mouth, when she saw Marenia, opened, and a small, soft sound came out of it. Marenia did not let her own face break. She walked. By the time she had reached the foot of the dais, a silence had fallen over the chamber that was deeper than any silence she had ever heard in this room. "Counselor Iskareth," Marenia said. Her voice carried. "Lady Vask, you are not expected. I am here. This is a closed proceeding. You have no standing. I am the mate of your king and the mother of his heirs, and I have, by every right of bond and blood and the old laws of this kingdom, every standing in this chamber. Counselor, step down from the dais." Iskareth's mouth made the smallest possible motion. "My lady, I am sorry. This is most distressing for you. But you have been deceived. The man you believe to be your mate is a king who lost his reason 5 months ago. The kingdom is now under regency. Your child is the child of a sick man and has no claim. The kindest thing this chamber can do for you is to take you into the household, see to your confinement, and ensure that you are cared for through the birth and after." He had done it well. He had taken every truth she had walked in carrying and turned every one of them inside out, and any lord in the chamber who had not been certain 10 seconds ago which way to lean was now leaning, very slightly, his way. She drew a breath. "Counselor, look at me." He looked at her. She raised her hands. The light came when she called it. It rose. It came up out of her chest and out through her palms in a slow, controlled bloom, and it filled the air around her like the light of a small, clean dawn. It lit the curve of her own belly, where, beneath the wool, a second light had begun to glow, the unmistakable glow of two small bodies that had not been born yet but were, very clearly, awake. The chamber made a sound. 40 mouths drawing breath at once. Iskareth stepped backward. His pale, narrow face had finally gone the color of his robes. "My lords and ladies of Ostvarn, I am Marenia Vask. I was kitchen girl in this palace until 2 years ago, when your king found me in the herb garden and asked me my name. I am the bearer of his claiming mark. I am the carrier of his children. I am the woman this man behind me has spent 5 months trying to have killed in my bed. 3 days ago, his agents murdered a man named Ranveth Holvin in the line of his duty. Look at the light, my lords. There has not been a queen of Ostvarn in 5 generations who carried it. Read your old charters tonight. Then look at this man, and ask yourselves what kingdom you thought you were saving when you walked into this chamber. Lord Corval sat back down very slowly. Iskareth raised one hand. My lady, you are not well. The southern guards along the north wall began to move toward her. The first guard reached her. He never touched her. The black wolf came down from the high gallery in a single drop. He had been waiting in the dark of the upper window, and he came down 40 feet of cold air in the kind of leap that no wolf of any kingdom had any right to be able to make, and he landed on the floor of the chamber with a sound like a stone dropping into still water, and the southern guards moving toward Marenya were no longer a problem. The chamber descended into chaos. There was killing. There was Kalorn coming through the side door with 60 loyal officers at his back. There was Corbin at the chamber doors with the eastern barracks behind him. There was Iskareth, on the dais, drawing from inside his robes the small ceremonial knife that all counselors carried and were never meant to use, and lunging forward at her belly. The knife stopped a hand's breadth from her belly. It stopped because her hand was around his wrist. The white silver light had come up through her arm without her asking. The knife-flat face was, finally, afraid. You should have let me through the door, she said quietly. The black wolf was at her elbow, looking up at Iskareth. No, she said quietly to her king. Not him. Not today. The trial steps for the household tomorrow. He stands on them in their place. The black wolf made a low sound, an agreement. She tightened her hand. The bones in Iskareth's wrist gave way. The knife dropped to the marble. He dropped to his knees. She pulled him close until her mouth was at his ear. Tova Halberin. 43 names. The kitchen master. The wine. You will live, counselor. You will live long enough to walk up the steps in front of every soul who stood in this chamber tonight. That is the only mercy I am giving you, and it is more than you gave any of them. She let him go. Kalorn's officers took him. She turned to the high seat. My lady Saerith. Step down. Saerith stepped down. She walked across the marble floor with the careful steps of a woman who had been told for 5 months that this floor was hers. She stopped 2 paces from Marenya. She looked at the curve of Marenya's belly, and at the second light still glowing softly beneath the wool, and her own eyes filled with tears. I did not know. About the wine. About any of it. They told me he was sick. I waited for him, my lady. For 5 months I waited. Marenya thought, I do not have to like her. But I am not going to make my reign begin on her bones. You will leave the palace tonight. You will go to the convent at Vial-Saran in the high north. You will spend the next year there. At the end of that year, if you have learned anything about the men who used your name, you may write to me, and I will read the letter. Yes, my lady. Go. Saerith went. Marenya walked the few short paces to Tova Halberin at the head of the line of accused. She knelt, awkwardly, with the help of Kalorn's hand at her elbow. She drew the long knife from her belt. She cut the rough hemp at Tova's wrists. The old woman caught her hands. Child. 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 You knew. All winter. You knew. I knew. I am sorry. I would have told you, but I did not want you to leave my cottage before he found you. I love you. Child. You came home. The black wolf at Marenya's side shifted, slowly, in front of 40 witnesses, into the man. He pulled his cloak around himself. He knelt beside her, and he laid his hand on Tova's face, very gently. I told you, she said. I told you I would find her for you. You told me, Tova. He helped Marenya to her feet. He drew her against his chest. He wrapped his cloak around them both, and the chamber slowly filled with the sound of 43 loyal officers and household servants, and one old fisherwoman weeping at the same time. The completing of the bond happened 3 nights later, in the small chapel above the king's library, with no witnesses but Kalorn and Tova and Corbin and the 2 stars that came in through the narrow eastern window. He bared his throat to her. She set her teeth into the soft place at the curve of his shoulder. The bond, which had pulsed and burned and quieted and roared inside her for 5 months and 11 days, finally clicked into place like the closing of a door that had been left ajar her entire life. She felt every memory he had been carrying for 5 months. She gave him, in return, the moment in the gallery when she had heard him say, "I know," through the study door. When it was finished, they sat together on the floor of the chapel, his back against the cold stone wall, her body curled into the curve of his, and they did not speak for a long time, because there was nothing left in either of them that needed to be said. Iskareth was tried at dawn 3 weeks later, and was hanged on the trial steps in the late afternoon. Lord Corvel was sentenced to exile in the cold marshes of the eastern coast. The kitchen master who had served the wine was found 6 months later, and was hanged beside the empty hill where Iskareth had hanged. Sereth of House Corvel wrote her first letter from Vail-Siran 9 months after she was sent there. After the third letter, 18 months after the trial, the Queen of Ostvarn took up her own pen and wrote, "Come south in the spring. We will speak." The twins were born 7 weeks after the homecoming, a boy and a girl. The boy was dark-haired and amber-eyed and quiet. They named him Halvin, after Tova's brother. The girl was dark-haired and pale-eyed, the eyes the color of the white silver light her mother carried, and from the first night of her life her small palms glowed faintly when she cried, like a candle in a window. They named her Merenwe, after no one, because she was new, and her name should be hers alone. A year and a day after she had walked back through the doors of the chamber, the Queen of Ostvarn stood at the high window of the king's tower, looking out at the lower city of her kingdom in the early evening light. A pair of arms came around her from behind. "You are not asleep. I am thinking." She leaned back against him. She felt the bond, quiet and steady and entirely closed, between her chest and his. "I was thinking," she said, "that I was so afraid, on the cliff path at Bray Eithlin, that I would never be able to come home. That if I did come home, I would come back as a smaller version of myself. I was thinking that the woman I was that day on the cliffs would not recognize the woman standing here now, and that I am glad she would not. I am glad I am taller than she was. I am glad I am louder. I am glad I no longer apologize for any room I walk into." He pressed his mouth against the top of her head. "I will spend the rest of my life," he said, "watching you walk into rooms." "Yes," she said, "you will." Down in the courtyard, a small, high voice rose in the kind of indignant cry that only a 1-year-old can produce, and a second small voice joined it. And then both voices dissolved into the sound of Tova Halberin laughing. Marenya reached up and laid her hand over his where it rested below her breastbone, and she said, very quietly, "Thank you for asking." "For asking what?" "You know what?" He bowed his head. When he answered, his voice was the low, rough voice she had loved in the high meadow 2 years and 7 months and 1,000 years ago. "Thank you for coming back." In the courtyard below, Tova began to sing. It was an old fisherwoman's song from the western coast, a song about a boat that had gone out in the morning and come back in the evening, and the children, hearing it, went quiet to listen. Marenya closed her eyes. She let her king hold her. She had come home.